Here we go. We are live. Good evening, wherever you are in South Africa, or somewhere else out of South Africa. Good morning. Welcome to Navigating South Africa's Cannabis Future, brought to you by Cheeba Cannabis Academy and Fields of Green. Thanks for joining us. For those of you in South Africa, it's very, very cold. I know there's quite a lot of people that have not been able to join us tonight because of load shedding. We had to actually move studios, so we had to come and set up in a temporary space quite last minute because of the chaos of load shedding. So I know that's had a big impact. We do record this and put it up afterwards, so we'll be able to share this with people. But thanks for your time tonight. Tonight is a really, really important webinar for us, especially on the cusp of September and the updates to legislation. There's a lot of talk going on about the proposed bill, and there's a lot of discussion that's needed around it. And I think now more than ever, we need to unify as a cannabis community and as a single voice in order to make sure that, especially in light of the pandemic, that the cannabis community and industry comes online properly. Because if it doesn't, we're going to lose traction, we're going to lose positioning. We're well placed to become one of the leaders of cannabis on this continent. But in order to do that, we need to mobilize, and it's our opinion that we need to mobilize now. We can't wait any longer. So I'm very happy to have some guests with us. John, I know you've just joined us, and you've just struggled to get in, but if you go to the top left next to the microphone, there's a little button there. If you click on that, you'll come into camera. Just a few things I want to highlight. There we go. Hi, John. Before I introduce everybody, there's a few bits and pieces I just wanted to bring to the attention of the cannabis community and everybody online tonight. So first of all, Fields of Green. They are currently running, if you haven't heard, a fundraising campaign to sort of put some more security into the farm up in Johannesburg, as well as to, basically keep the campaign going. They have been doing such incredible work over the last few years, and we really all need to support them. So even if it's 50 Rand or whatever you can put towards this, they're getting close towards their target. And, it's our responsibility as a community to make sure that we are supporting them who are sort of standing in the front lines and fighting. What's also happening at the moment is there's a South African cannabis survey that's taking place. So please, it's really important that you get onto that and give your opinions on that. Research is super important. We really need to get as much data as possible. So please, can you support that? Myrtle, I know, has just entered the room. Myrtle, you just need to click on the button on the top left. There's a little icon, just the microphone. So if you click on that, we'll be able to see you. There we go. Here you are. Amazing. How's it? How are you doing?
Good. Hello, everybody.
Cool. So I was just telling the guys about your fundraising campaign and how everybody needs to come on board and support. And then also just basically about the cannabis survey that's going on, so that everybody can get involved and support that as much as possible. Super important. And without further ado, let's do some introductions. So I don't know where everyone is on everyone's screen, but if we can start on my left. Myrtle, if you could just please introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hello, everybody. My name is Myrtle Clarke, and I'm Managing Director of Fields of Green for All, cannabis legalization nonprofit company. And I'm very pleased to be here tonight.
Thanks, Myrtle. And I know you're going through some extremely tough personal times at the moment, so we really do sincerely appreciate your time. Thank you. The man on her right, John, it's amazing that you've joined us. I'll let you introduce yourself in a sec, but I saw John on an international webinar a few months ago, and was blown away by the level of detail and the factual knowledge and insight he has into the global cannabis community. Specifically has a lot of information on developing countries, the South American territory, the African territory, and developed countries as well. So it's going to be great to have his insights on models and potential things that we can take from those models to use here. But John, just introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Trenton, and welcome everyone. I'm thrilled to be participating in this conversation. My name is John Kagia. I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer with New Frontier Data. And for those who don't know us, New Frontier is a market research data and analytics company focused on the legal cannabis industry. We've been studying the emerging cannabis industry in the US initially, starting back in 2014. And as markets have emerged globally, we've expanded our coverage to cover not just the emerging kind of marijuana markets, but we're also covering THC, CBD, and industrial hemp. So we've committed ourselves over the past 6 years to really trying to understand what is happening on a global basis as we make this transition from unregulated, prohibition-driven markets to fully legal, regulated global cannabis economy. So really excited to be involved in this conversation. And just on a personal note, while I am based in the US out of Washington, DC, I am a Kenyan national, born and raised. So I'm actually doing this webinar from Nairobi. And when I joined this industry 6 years ago, I never would have thought that we'd be talking about cannabis legalization in Africa. So both on a professional basis and a personal basis, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here.
I can go next. Hi, everybody. Good evening. And for all of those that I'm meeting for the first time on this very wonderful new platform. My name is Philasande Mahlakata. I am based in the Eastern Cape, Mpondoland. I am project coordinator for Umzimvubu Farmer Support Network, which is an organization that is working very closely with the rural farmers all across Mpondoland, and working together to connect the farmers with legal assistance, government support, and all kinds of development within the industry. Great to meet you all.
Russ, Gareth, go for it.
All right. My name is Gareth Prince, and I started the cannabis conversation in this country 22 years ago when I had applied to be admitted as an attorney. And the authorities in my country deemed that I was not fit and proper because I was not apologetic about my cannabis usage. Our first constitutional challenge failed in the year 2002 by 5 votes to 4 or 6 to 5. And again, we took up the conversation in 2013 after I was arrested again. And that matter ultimately resulted in Prince versus the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development in 2018, where we finally got the victory, or the government to acknowledge that adult citizens, and now also children, have the right to use cannabis if that is their choice for their life project. So for the past 20 years, we've been trying to keep, as a Rastafari, we've been trying to keep this conversation alive and to bring to government's attention that cannabis is not just the healing of this nation, it has the potential to be the healing of Africa and the world in general. So we are quite anxious after so many years to finally find ourselves at this juncture where we can now start to engage in a positive, uplifting and progressive manner to develop inclusive African cannabis laws. So welcome to all the denizens out there and the netizens out there. And it's good to share a platform with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. We really appreciate your time. I know all of you in South Africa have been at the forefront of cannabis for a long time. So thank you for joining us. Paul is just going to give us a quick overview of the cannabis bill that is being proposed at the moment. So Paul, over to you.
So my name is Paul Michael Keichel. I'm an attorney at Schindler's Attorneys. How this started for me was that as a law student, I, as part of my coursework, had to read all about Gareth Prince's first failed attempt at cannabis legalization. And I thought that was incredibly unfair, and I thought it was an incorrect decision. I wrote an essay in my final year of law that got into the hands of Myrtle and Jules, the late Julian Stobbs. And I ended up becoming their attorney and actually standing up next to Gareth Prince in 2018 in the Constitutional Court when we received the judgment that we're talking about. And what that judgment did, as I'm sure all of you knew or already know, is that it said that to continue to prohibit the personal and private use of cannabis by adults and now children, but by adults in South Africa was unconstitutional. And what the Constitutional Court did was it gave Parliament 2 years to give effect to the judgment through reactive legislation. We now have the Cannabis for Private Purposes Bill that has been published. It's not yet open for public consultation or public comment, but what it is it's the first attempt by Parliament to regularize the personal and private use of cannabis. What it does not do is it doesn't create a cannabis industry. It doesn't deal with medicinal cannabis. It's the first bite at the cherry, really. And there are certain problems with the bill that we're no doubt going to discuss tonight through the questions and answers. It tries to establish certain limits that people can have as to cannabis cultivation material and cannabis proper as defined by the Act. And what really we are dealing with here is an attempt that we say is going to be open to constitutional challenge if it remains in its current form, because the basis of Gareth's win in the Constitutional Court was on the basis of the right to privacy. And if you're going to be putting arbitrary limitations and allowing the police, the South African police force, to kick down people's door and count the number of cannabis plants that they have in their personal and private space, then you're hardly giving effect to the right to privacy of the citizens of South Africa. So that's what the bill is. I'm not going to get into too much detail because I'm sure we're going to flesh this out through the question and answer session. And no doubt Gareth and the rest of the other panelists are going to have a lot to say about this. So that's what we're dealing with this evening. That's what we're going to invite you at the end of this to comment on and to make submissions to Parliament on.
Excellent, thank you for that. So let's get into it. Myrtle, I wanted to start with you because this is obviously incredibly frustrating for you with this, to have been fighting for this for so long. And, as I've heard a few people say, it's almost like there was very little consideration that went into this. I think one of the most frustrating things is to my understanding, there was just no dialogue with the cannabis community at all. What's your feeling about the proposal?
Well, apart from being, equally frustrated with people's righteous indignation about the bill, there's lots of noise on social media and people being incredibly indignant on the content of the bill. And I'd like to just rein that in a little bit because we need to make really informed comments on this bill. And yes, it is actually quite atrocious. But if you concentrate your mind to the contents of the bill, what comes through is absolutely, Trenton, as you just said, this non-engagement. Gareth's been doing this for 22 years. Myself and Jules have been doing this for the last 10 years. And why are they just not listening to us when we are, in fact, the experts? And if we are not qualified experts, we are certainly flanked from all over the world by perfectly capable experts with all of the scientific evidence. And I was having a chat with our legal team the other day and having a chat with a bunch of activists and lobbyists in Cape Town. And this point comes out over and over again. We have actually done a very good job of educating the South African public. On the Dacha Couple YouTube channel alone, we have got nearly 50 homemade South African videos that people can watch. And I think that the South African public is by and large educated. We've had incredible support from the media over the last 10 years. I could almost count on my two hands the amount of bad press that cannabis has got over the last 10 years. So when people say that, the public need to be educated, I don't think so. I think that it'll never be finished, but what we have to concentrate on is educating the lawmakers, because this bill just shows gross ignorance about the use of the plant, the botany, the biology, the science, everything about the plant. And that's an insult to us, our intelligence, our efforts, the most incredible amount of money that we have all spent over the last at least 10 years, that has all come from civil society. South African cannabis has never been funded by any large think tanks and other large organizations that support drug policy reform. And this is not something, this is not because we haven't tried, but we've managed to do what we can do because of our constituency. We estimate that we have about 20 million cannabis users in South Africa. which is a third of our population. And I say that that's an estimate. So educating the lawmakers is really at the top of our agenda. And I think that we have to start at the beginning. You know, it's almost patronizing to our government how we will need to teach them about this plant, because if they knew anything, a bill like this would never have come out. So that is really my first reaction to the bill was like, who wrote this?
Yeah. I mean, Gareth, my understanding is that you know, you've put out some opinions on social media and stuff, and my understanding of the government did reach out to you at some point after they published the bill. Is that correct?
Well, we've started to engage on a very elementary level with the Justice Portfolio Committee as such. However, you reckon that in the development of this bill, you find that none of us was acknowledged, were consulted, nothing at all. So now they're saying, well, the process is, well, the Justice Department had to develop the bill, had to submit it to Cabinet, and then Cabinet had to send it off to Parliament. But in the past, there's evidence of the fact that there was public consultation in the development of the bill before it was submitted to Cabinet. And our concern is that who were consulted in deciding that this should be a bill that accommodates decriminalization as opposed to commercialization. You know, Paul spoke about the arbitrary limits. Who were consulted in deciding that people should have 4 plants, that they shouldn't be taller than 15 centimeters, you know? Yeah. To my mind, this bill was basically simply a last-ditch attempt by government to show that they were doing something about the bill, and that very, very little progressive thinking went into the formulation of this. And here you find that is what is so frustrating, that the law dictates a very clear process how new laws are to be developed. And whereas the judicial culture in South Africa is that of minimalism, which means that the Constitutional Court, they don't specifically dictate to Parliament what it is that they must do. They simply said, these laws are unconstitutional, go and fashion laws that complies with our new constitutional vision. And that obviously must have meant public participation right from the very outset, because this is a law that concerns people's freedom. And in a constitutional democracy, arrest is the most severe sanction society can exercise against anybody. We reserve that for murder and rape and hijacking, the most serious of crimes. People should not be arrested for planting cannabis. That goes, like 90% against what the Constitutional Court decided. That the idea of using the criminal justice system to regulate cannabis is unconstitutional. And this new bill does not take cognizance of that at all.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Gareth. Philasande, you're on the ground, you know, you're in the Eastern Cape, where, you know, a quarter of the world's cannabis comes from, potentially. It's a massive part of the economy there, and you know, day-to-day survival. What's the feeling on the ground from the farmers in the Eastern Cape? Do they have an understanding of the bill? Are they keeping an eye on it? Is this kind of something in the distance? What's your feeling on the ground there from what's happening?
It is very much something that is very distant from the community. To begin with, they didn't understand the ruling about the privacy use. They didn't understand the bill. They don't know it exists. They don't know it's been circulating. A lot of these people that are growing cannabis can't read. A lot of them don't have network. They don't have television. They do have radio, but there's not enough talk about it. And when there is talk about it, somehow it's on the negative side of things. So there is no proper engagement to actually make sure that they are included in decision making, and they are not consulted in any way. We did have an opportunity at some point to address they stand in this whole thing at the Cannabis Summit, which was the very first of its own last year in East London, called by the government. The first thing that we noticed that was really seriously wrong about that was that these engagements were being held in East London. And East London has got absolutely very little to do with cannabis. And we felt that the people who grow, whether in KwaZulu-Natal or Limpopo, could have been engaged more and being brought into the discussions, just to acknowledge that they have been suffering the most. They have been jailed. Some of them are actually getting arrested currently. I know of somebody that was arrested last week. Meanwhile, if they understood what the law says, then they would be able to argue for themselves or ask for some kind of assistance, legal assistance. But nobody knows how to be in this fight.
Yeah, John, I'm going to come. John, I wanted to come to you. So you have a big, broad perspective. You've seen legislative change in America. And I think the difference is that because the economic situation that we're in here, especially in light of the pandemic, that this cannabis issue is a moral and a personal sort of rights issue. But at the same time, it's becoming more desperate because of our sort of financial situation here. And there are a lot of people who think that cannabis is obviously going to have a big impact on our economy. So it seems a bit more desperate than it might have been in developing countries. What are some of the experiences, some of the things you've seen countries go through in terms of, I know there's been frustration everywhere, but how would you draw parallels between the two?
So that's a great question. And I think it's really important to understand the distinction between what South Africa is proposing in this bill and what we've seen by and large in the rest of the world. So as Gareth had referenced, this is not a commercialization bill. This is not going to establish a legal, regulated commercial cannabis industry. This is going to allow people to possess, consume, grow their own, give it away without compensation, but it's not going to allow the commercialization that has created, the very significant cannabis economies in many parts of North America, the US and Canada, and increasingly in Europe. So maybe just first, cannabis demand is a global phenomenon, and it is massive. By our estimates, each year, consumers around the world are spending $350 billion US on cannabis, and there's around 264 million people who consume regularly. In Africa alone, that's $37 billion spent on cannabis each year, and South Africa's share of that is about 1.2 billion. So this is a large, vibrant economy already, and the question is, how is that money being captured by the economy, and is government going to benefit at all through the development of the regulated market? We actually have not seen, on a national basis, any country propose a sort of decriminalized personal use allowance without a commercialization component, as we're seeing it in South Africa. So there's going to be some novelty here in what is being proposed. And just two things to note. One, which I think is notable, is the possession. While I agree they seem arbitrary, they are actually much higher than we have seen in many other countries around the world. Possession limits of 600 grams, which is about 21 ounces, is, by way of contrast, most states will only allow you between 1 and 2 ounces. In the US, will allow you between 1 and 2 ounces for personal possession. So we're talking 10 to 20 times the amount for personal possession in South Africa under this proposal. The problem is the law of unintended consequences. And the only market that I think is a really good analog for what's being proposed in South Africa is Washington, DC. DC is the only state in the country, the only market in the country where it's legal to grow small quantities, 4 to 6 plants, possess, give away, and consume, but illegal to sell. This is a function of some strange US laws governing the city governance over the federal government. But the point being, DC had its hand forced in allowing this without commercial component. And what did we see? In the past 3 years, you've seen the emergence of what have been phenomenally successful donation-based services. Buy a t-shirt for $60, get your 1/4 ounce for free. Buy a candle for $10, get your gram of oil for free and it runs the gamut. We even know a group of very entrepreneurial students who were selling art works for the price of an eighth of cannabis, and in 1 year they made $4 million between the six of them. It's become a completely kind of wild west, unregulated market, and this is not what the government had intended. But without that commercialization component, do not underestimate how enterprising entrepreneurs will find gray spaces in the way the laws are written to continue to supply what is a very large basis of demand. And so because of that, that's the reason why most states go to a commercialized model, because it allows much more stringent regulations, much more effective consumer protections, much more kind of streamlined process where this money is being captured by the regulated economy rather than by the illicit or gray market.
Thanks, John. It's an interesting perspective. We had a webinar a few weeks ago with some guys from Europe, and they were actually saying that we shouldn't be complaining so much because of this bill, because it's a lot more progressive than what they're getting in Europe. But I mean, we have obviously a different lens, and I think there's more at stake in our country right now. Paul, what do you think some of the issues are? Like, what can we do to move this forward? Like, as a community, how can we rally? How can we engage with government in a more proactive way?
Look, I think one of the problems is that, firstly, there's this constitutional ideal of participatory governance that governments, as our duly elected leaders, is supposed to be engaging with us and actually consult with us before they do anything in our name. But that doesn't seem to be something that actually happens day to day. What's going to happen is that this bill is going to be opened up for public comment, for public participation, and you can be almost guaranteed that if there are 10,000 angry stoners shouting at government, they're not going to listen to anybody. So what you need to do is start rallying behind the civil society organizations, like call it the top five, the people who have actually been doing this for a long time, and who can consolidate all of the information and speak with a united voice. Because if these people have the ear of government, they're going to be more likely to get the message across. We need to convince government that their strategy needs to be on the basis of harms reduction. So if you are going to limit the rights of people, what is the harm that you're trying to prevent? And if by prohibiting a certain human behavior, you are criminalizing it, and the harm that befalls you through criminalizing it is actually worse than the harm that you're preventing, then you're being unreasonable and irrational in your lawmaking, and you are achieving nothing. As Gareth said, we're a constitutional democracy. We're supposed to be based on the foundational values of human dignity, equality, and most importantly, freedom. So if you're going to be limiting anybody's freedom, there needs to be a good reason for doing that. And as Myrtle said, they need to start listening to the people who actually understand cannabis, because this is not a time to be erring on the side of caution. If you do not understand cannabis, you should not be making laws around cannabis. Rather hand over the lawmaking process to the people like Gareth, the people like Myrtle, countless other people who have been doing this for a number of years. Let them get involved. That is the way that we need to be doing this. And it's all very well and good to say that civil society needs to do this, but government also needs to start listening. And Gareth already has government's ear. Myrtle is soon going to have government's ear. I just hope that somebody who is listening actually gets government to pay attention, because that's really what's required here.
I want to get more into, so let's step forward, and if we can get government to listen. Let's talk about an ideal model for South Africa, because there are various different stakeholders in this. There are the sort of marginalized, the man on the ground who's growing eggplants in Keichel, sending his kid to school, the money. There's the Eastern Cape farmers who have been using this to make a living for many, many years. Then there's the consumer. There's making sure that the consumer is protected. There's also making sure that we stimulate small business so that people can make a living out of this industry as well. I'm not so interested in the big business and big pharma, because they have money anyway. I do think there's a role for them in the industry, because you need large volumes of cash to do certain things on certain levels. But how do we ensure that a particular rollout plan covers all those people, because the stakeholders are so different. From the mom living in the suburbs who's making her oil to the guy in the township. They are such dramatically different polar opposites in terms of their needs and wants and brackets. How do we create something that makes sure everybody can benefit, and at the same time the consumer is protected? Gareth, what's your thoughts on that, please?
The focus we need is one of the major differences between Africa and Europe, for instance, is that in Europe, they do not have needs such as a lack of food, clothes, and shelter. There you find the focus is recreational, it's medicinal. In South Africa, our focus is providing food, clothes, and shelter to our people. So the conversation needs to change away from substance use and abuse towards economic regeneration, job creation, and providing within the basic needs of people. We will never have the problem of having too much cannabis within South Africa, because recreational usage and medicinal cannabis, that is a very small percentage. And even now, a lot of people are thinking, I'm going to grow cannabis and we're going to export. The market for us is not export. People are not buying out there. There are people in Europe that are sitting with tons of cannabis that they can't sell because their focus is limited. We want to build houses in South Africa. We want to make alternative plastics. We need to make energy, fuel for our people. We're talking about basic needs here, and we're talking about industries, because cannabis is a labor-intensive industry. We don't mind that. We want jobs. We want work. Our people, they want to work. And we are saying government needs to set free, unlock our tax monies towards these things, which are their primary duties and which should be their primary focus. Let's change the conversation towards creating food, clothes, and shelter for our people through and with cannabis. Because our government needs to be proactive in this regard. Big business is not coming to the party, so we can't depend upon them. It has to be government in association with its people. Never before has there been such a beautiful opportunity to establish a new social compact between governments and its people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gareth. Myrtle, you had some input there?
One of our bylines for the last 10 years is you can't get what you want unless you know what you want. And everybody who knows us know that we say this all the time. So it's all very well saying, this is what needs to be done. But unless you know exactly in minute detail what needs to be done, and you've thought through each one of these aspects, we're just going to carry on talking ourselves around in circles. So I think that everybody knows Fields of Green for All's manifesto. And for those people who are maybe listening from overseas, it's called Cannabis in South Africa, the People's Plant, a full spectrum manifesto for policy reform. Now, I think that this manifesto has been built on a foundation of the fact that South Africans are very, very tired of broken promises. Now, John, with all due respect, we in South Africa are sick of hearing about billions and squillions that this industry is worth. In 1994, when we got our constitutional democracy, the people of South Africa were promised houses. They were promised land. They were promised jobs and freedom and an amazing rainbow nation for the whole of South Africa. What have we got? So I want all of the economists and the agri-economists and the lobbyists and the academics to stop speaking about these big numbers. And I feel very strongly about that, because you are enticing pump and dump schemes, share schemes, schemes of foreign investment that do nothing but keep our South African people in labored servitude. I want to speak about planting a seed, because right now up here in Johannesburg, we are just now, as I speak, we're getting the first rains of spring. It hasn't rained in Johannesburg since May. Us cannabis farmers are getting ready to plant. We're not thinking big numbers. We're thinking that bread on the table next week. That's what we're thinking. So South Africans are tired of broken promises. Stop telling us how much this is worth. What we need to do is look at this model, okay? Look at the model. I will defy you to find anything in that manifesto that is not covered. When people talk about, the Justice Department, there are actually 22 government departments that need to be involved in cannabis legalization. Who are we talking to? Justice. Why aren't we talking to small business development? Who are we talking to? Agriculture. Why aren't we speaking to the farmers on the ground, like Pila said? Why is the meeting in East London when the people in Port St. John's don't have the money to get there? So in South Africa, we are tired. We are sick of broken promises. We are sick of foreigners, coming to meddle in our cannabis. Because what is happening now is that our private bill is the best and the worst that we could have got. Yes, it's very good that we got privacy first, and the international people think it's amazing. But it's the worst because of the poor people in this country, and it's the worst because of our police. I mean, I stay with Charles, who runs our arrest helpline, and I can tell you that every single day there are arrests. Decriminalized? It's not decriminalized. So I want to tell everybody that we've got a plan, a very concrete plan. You want to know about seeds? It's in the book. You want to know about jobs? It's in the book. You want to know about drug testing at work? It's in the book. Children, it's in the book. All 22 government departments are listed. Every single stakeholder is listed. There's 16 pages of stakeholders. So we know the stakeholders. We know where the need is. We're sick of broken promises. So it is there in black and white, and it's been open for public comment for 2 years. So that is my plea, especially to people who are not from South Africa. Stop promising that this is going to save our country. It's not. That is why Fields of Green for All's campaign is called Cannabis Can Help South Africa. Just like cannabis doesn't cure cancer, cannabis does not save economies. It helps. And it helps in a consistent, slow, developing way with lots of thought behind it so that everybody can benefit.
So sorry to cut you off there. I just want to keep, John, just from your perspective, and we're certainly, I don't think Myrtle's, singling you out as an international by any means, but I do understand there is a certain, protectionist attitude we have because, from the historical sort of international people coming into the country. So I do understand where that sentiment comes from. But we're not alone. We're a developing country, and there are lots of other developing countries that are in similar situations that are looking to cannabis, to help people on the ground, not just make the wealthier wealthier, but really have a significant impact on the ground. What are some of the models that you've seen working or being established in some other developing countries that seem to be working okay at the moment that you could highlight?
And working.
So first, I have to say I'm highly sympathetic with Myrtle's position. I actually think you are absolutely right. One of the problems that I think you've seen in most developing markets, and broadly speaking here, I'm talking about Southern Africa and South America, which have been the most progressive and advancing regulations, is that you had Western companies, a lot of Canadians, a lot of European companies parachute in with huge amounts of money to both advocate for rules and regulations that advance their cause without really thinking about the downstream implications for local stakeholders, and two, create structures that make it extraordinarily challenging for the people who have been producing cannabis in those markets since long before these laws were advanced. It makes it really challenging for them to compete. So part of the reason, and I say this as a Kenyan who, I have exactly the same concerns about what is happening in Kenya, though South Africa may be a few years ahead of this country, is what, for lack of at risk of sounding cross, would almost appear to be the colonialization of Africa's cannabis economy. For the developing nation, or developing world, the approaches to cannabis regulation will necessarily have to look different than they do in Europe and in North America, because the demands for the economy are different. So a few considerations. One, there's got to be a place for the smallholder farmer to be able to continue to participate in the economy. So whether it's through a cooperative model or other vertically supplied market that allows small growers to produce and feed into larger operators who will then process and ensure there's equitable revenue sharing in that model. The idea that it will be 5 or 6 companies that have licenses in in these countries, I think will be a major failure to achieve one of the potential opportunities here. Second is the understanding that when we're talking about cannabis, particularly in the developing world, we are thinking both about let's call it medicinal and adult use cannabis, recreational cannabis, but also about industrial hemp. And I think this is what Gareth was alluding to. This should not just be about the industrial forms of the plant, but all of the potential industrial applications that can be activated with the commercialization or industrialization of the entirety of the cannabis plant. And there's a lot of very low technology applications that I think are particularly well suited for Africa in particular, that unfortunately are not a big part of the conversation, whether it's around building materials, whether it's around cattle feed, whether it's seed for hemp seed, which is extraordinarily nutritionally dense, that can be used to allay acute malnutrition. I mean, there's a lot of low-grade applications, low-technology applications that I think would be especially well suited for the developing economies that too often are being written out of the regulations that are being proposed. This has to be a multi-stakeholder engagement. These decisions cannot be made behind closed doors and smoky rooms by a handful of the most connected people in our societies. And until we're able to get the people who are going to be most likely to benefit, or for whom the activation of this economy, the cannabis economy, are going to be most likely to benefit, until we're able to get them into the room, I think the promise of cannabis will fail to be reached. And one final thing, cannabis is not a panacea. This is not going to save South Africa, nor it's not going to save the continent of Africa. It is, as Myrtle said, one piece which, if effectively regulated, can create the basis for both a more equitable and more just society, where you're not having people prosecuted, and it tends to be the poorest and most disadvantaged who bear the brunt of cannabis prohibition. But it also creates catalysts for whether it is sustainability, a more healthful and wellness-focused society, without all of the stigma that has plagued cannabis for the past century and beyond. So it is not going to be a one-size-fits-all model. There is going to need to be trial and error to get the right solution. But getting the stakeholders in the room, ensuring that this is designed to serve the local population first before the conversation about global expansion happens. And the recognition that there's going to need to be some trial and error to make sure that the benefits of this economy are equitably transmitted, will require thought, will require planning, and will require collaboration. So South Africa is making a really important step in the right direction, but there's still a great deal of work that remains to be done.
Great, thanks for that, John. Philasande, you're on the ground, and this is, while the politicians bicker and just try and figure out what to do, and the businessmen all jostling for position, what's happening in your area is that people need to put food on the table. What in your opinion, from that region, would be a fast solution to ensure that the revenue pipeline continues to make sure people are eating on the ground there?
Thanks for that, Bretton. It's really simple in that we can keep to what the people are doing now, what the people have been doing for the past hundreds of years, people trading and people openly selling, open markets, you know what I mean? Because people are growing, not necessarily for their own consumption sometimes, very little for their own consumption, if at all. What they use cannabis for, besides medicinal use at home, traditional remedies and so forth, is to put food on the table. And licensing regimes are hindering people from getting ahead with that. The need for permits to do A, B, C, and D. So if people are allowed to grow cannabis and sell cannabis because it's not killing anybody, and there's absolutely nothing you can pin to the market that is existing and say, this is wrong or this is harmful to anybody. So really, without complicating matters as they are for communities right now, all they know is to put seed in the ground, look after it. It would help to open people up to bettering their crop and just upping their skill and their game on cultivating, so that they've got a better product at the end of the day to open up to even more markets. And of course, the hemp industry is looking very promising, and it's being moved to the Department of Agriculture, who's not saying anything about it right now for whatever reasons. So we kind of like eagerly waiting to hear when they can give us the go ahead, because that is one of the markets that are really readily available for simple people, smallholder farmers to take advantage of at the moment.
Great, thanks for that. Paul, do you think a free market economy would work here, where people can just buy, sell, trade as they want, like the apples? Do you think it's something that would work in this territory?
Look, I do think it must be as liberal as is legitimate. There obviously are going to also be legitimate restrictions in the free trade of cannabis. Like there was the recent judgment that Gareth mentioned that makes it no longer a crime for a child to possess and use cannabis. But it may, for example, still be legitimate to license cannabis dispensaries in order to ensure that, for example, they don't sell to underage individuals, for example. But, there are various models. I mean, when we went to trial in the trial of the plant, Professor David Nutt was actually talking about how a regulated model, as opposed to a completely laissez-faire capitalist model or completely unregulated model, is actually better or best at reducing the harms of cannabis. There's an interesting quirk in the bill, actually, which says that the dealing in cannabis, and there's a new definition of dealing in cannabis, remains a crime unless it is in terms of an act of parliament. So there is, if you read between the lines, there is the potential that parliament does actually, parliament may actually come forward with, for example, a cannabis trade act or a cannabis trade bill or whatever it is that you're going to call it, or some other attempt to regulate the trade in cannabis. So this is not necessarily the end of the story or the end game, but it's very difficult to answer as to whether we should completely free it up. But I will certainly say that the subsistence or these small matchbox farmers and the people who are growing cannabis just to scratch together a living, certainly their behavior shouldn't be criminalized unless, for example, selling to an underage individual or whatever. But they shouldn't be required to pass strict licensing requirements or spend any kind of significant money in order to be permitted the freedom to earn a living through a trade in cannabis. That would be completely contrary to all of the ideals that we've already mentioned in this webinar.
Great, thanks, guys. We don't have a lot of time left. A few things we need to do. Firstly, we need to give a course away, which we promised we'd do. So the course is, we've just picked somebody random from the group. So congratulations to Simon Clarke, I think it is. He has won a course with us. So hopefully he can start. So congratulations to him. Technology went okay tonight. And anybody else who wants to sign up with a Cannabis Fundamental course, which there's a code where you can get a discount. So in the last few minutes, I just want to do a round circle and end up on a positive note. Like Gareth, what's the positive future for you? What do you see the next step as?
Equality, that's one of the main things in my mind. What lawmakers need to understand is that at the very least, you can't treat cannabis users worse than you are treating alcohol drinkers or tobacco smokers. At the very least, we enjoy the same rights. And we also feel that there's more than justifiable reason as to why cannabis should enjoy a much wider freedom regime than what they are currently proposing, and that holism is much better than a piecemeal approach, and that the South African situation demands holistic, inclusive cannabis laws. And instead of following the Canadian model where people have to go back to court every 2 years, why not work with the South African people, and let's show what can happen if a government transparently and honestly work with its people. We are living in changing times, you know. Let's give the world something to that's going to position South Africa as a world leader, and that's going to turn the hearts of the people back to politicians in order for them to do what we elected them to do. It's about time that we hold politicians to account and that we speak truth to power.
Great, thanks, Gareth. Myrtle, final words?
My final words are three final words. It's called Dacha Private Club. Dacha Private Club. Because if there's nothing that we can do right now, okay, in terms of, you know, we're trying our best, but on the ground, what we can do is we can form Dacha Private Clubs, which are small, and I emphasize small. These are not franchise businesses. These are small, local community groups that form like a Dacha Stokvel. As South Africans know what a Stokvel is. And we can do this because it teaches us a lot about working for each other and working for the good of the community. South Africa has probably 50 to 60 Dacha private clubs already. And this model seems to be working really well. It can work from, can be based in a exercise book in a shack in Keichel, and it can be in a 5-star apartment building in Cape Town. You know, it's the one model that fits right across the board. And I think that we need to mobilize in terms of the clubs, because it will create a great foundation for people, for simple people to learn simple business skills. And then hopefully one day we get trade in South Africa, and there is the opportunity for the home grower to transition into the small business and for the Dacha Private Club to still exist. So I think that the DPCs, as we call them, is the one enduring model. And there's going to be lots of nuances going forward. So that's my ending plug. And it's been lovely being in this room. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Myrtle. John, final words, any advice for us?
Yeah, two perspectives. First, just a reminder that the fact that South Africa's constitutional court declared that the state had no right to intrude in the personal use of cannabis, I think is a profound decision, and for it to have happened in South Africa, doubly so. So for the South Africans, you know, while even as you go through this messy middle of regulatory development, recognize that what the Constitutional Court on a global basis is a truly extraordinary thing, and I think has actually rang the bell in a lot more countries around the world that the rights of cannabis consumers shall not be infringed. Second, and building on what Myrtle has said, in this messy middle, as the final rules and regulations are being decided, there's huge opportunity for innovation. And whether it is through private clubs, whether it's engagement of smallholder growers, you know, I would just really encourage South Africans to approach this moment as an opportunity. It's going to take a while for rules and regulations to be submitted, but that does not mean that the engine has to stop. Rather, it means that there's a huge opportunity to innovate new ways in which to build a robust, vibrant, and exciting cannabis community in South Africa in a way that we really have not seen anywhere else in the world.
Well, thanks for that, John. Really appreciate your input tonight. Philasande, some final words quickly. We've got 2 minutes to go. What are you hoping to see in the next sort of 6 to 12 months?
Well, yes, I'm happy to hear that people won't be getting arrested, and some education would go a long way. I mean, education of the police, because I doubt the police really understand what all of this talk is all about. They don't understand the privacy ruling, and they keep tormenting people. Okay, so we're looking on the bright side of things. We're still not allowed to sell. What can I say? We want to sell Dacha. We want to make money from it. We want to be able to use it. We're allowed to use it. So that's, the green light. But a lot of people where I come from and the people that I speak for and along with need to make money from this thing. So if anything, we need to start having positive talk towards that and inclusion and, acknowledgement that as the rural communities, we are somehow being thought of. You know what I mean?
Thanks for that. Paul, quick last minute words from you.
I think that the major positive to come out of this piece of legislation is that it makes provision for the expungement of criminal records, which, although it doesn't go far enough, it's an acknowledgement that there has been past harm and that we need to at least undo some of that past harm by taking over this or eliminating this cloud that hangs over so many people's heads. They struggle to get employment, they struggle to travel overseas and the like, and at least by removing that criminal record, you're going some way to making amends.
It is a positive step forward. Guys, thank you so much. I know this is a really complex issue and a complex challenge, but what inspires me is everybody here and being so passionate about cannabis and what the plant can do and will do. Really appreciate your time. For those of you out there, apologies for technical issues. Beyond our control, unfortunately, this will have been recorded. Will go up in the next few days. So thank you for joining us. Guys, have an amazing evening. Take your care out there. And for those of you in South Africa, I think it's a bit warmer where you are, John, but don't freeze. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And, the Cheeba Africa Cannabis Academy. Have a great night, everybody. Good night.
One love.
Bye-bye.
Mwah.